Let me begin. I mean, this is a town hall meeting on the APS Corporate Reform Initiative, and let me say right at the outset that maybe our marketing by using the word corporate was not so good, but because people react in many and sometimes peculiar ways to that phrase. Let me simply point out, we are a corporation. We're incorporated as a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. And I think the important difference between a real corporation and us is in a real corporation, the leadership is responsible to the shareholders. We are responsible to the members. And that is built into the laws, actually, of incorporation. You have to have good connections to your members. So it's a different animal. And so I think, let me try to make clear as we go exactly what that means. Now, I'm here, I am the president of APS this year, but I'm really here on behalf of a committee that was formed last fall. It's called the Ad Hoc APS Committee on Corporate Reform, as you see there. And down at the bottom are the members of that. Some of them are here, but I won't make them stand up in duty. It's basically the presidential line, that's the first four names. Excuse me. And the elected members of the executive committee, plus Cherry Murray down here on the bottom, who's there because she's ex officio because she's the chairperson or chair of the Constitution and Bylaws Committee, and whatever we decide to do will require change in the Constitution and bylaws, and we almost have to do that to meet the new legal expectations. Also, we're not alone. There's a lot of organizations going through this exercise right now. The one perhaps best known to us would be the American Institute of Physics. Okay. Now, the goal here is to create a governance and operating leadership model that is effective in the world that we live in, that we're going into, not the one of the past. There's absolutely no question that APS has been incredibly successful. We are admired. We have the best journals. We are considered innovators and all these good things, and we're very proud of that. And so the issue is not whether there was something wrong in the past, because it worked, and it's led us to distinction. The question really is, in some people's minds certainly, that are we equipped to go forward in a world that is really very, very different? It's much more international. 2/3 of the papers published in Physical Review are from abroad. The complexity is greater, and everything's rapidly changing. I think we feel this in our individual lives. We feel this in our national life, and APS is no different. The specifics may be different, but I think the fact that things are changing and you better pay attention is universal. That may be a little strong, but you know what I mean. The scope is it involves our governance bodies. That's the council and the executive board, the top bodies in which the elected members sit, and our executive structure, but only at the top executive level. This is the operating officers, the executive officer, the editor-in-chief, and the treasurer publisher, I guess it is. We're not trying to reform the whole organization. That would not be appropriate for us to do, and that's not the point. That's for the executive to do if it's necessary. Okay. Now, some history and background. The roots of this initiative really stretch back quite a ways, 6 or 7 years for sure, because we've talked to all these people. And the presidential line has been evolving in its concern that APS is not structured well for the future. It's not a creature of this year or last year. It's a creature of a cumulative worry that has developed in the presidential line over a substantial period of time with a substantial number of people with different personalities, interests, and so on and so forth. It is also, at least in our strategic plan, the second bullet, you may know of it, you may even have read it, but two of the important imperatives in that document are to ensure continuing institutional excellence. Okay, and we certainly want to do that, and that's on our minds. The other is to achieve one APS. We have been criticized, and even criticized ourselves, for the fact that when you have this structure we have, there's different offices, and there are different physical places, and so on and so forth. They have their own leadership, they have their own traditions. So it's not always easy to make this thing act coherently. I'm not saying people are bad, it's just a kind of structural issue. So that's, and I think there's a very strong desire to make APS more coherent in that sense. Now the third bullet, the executive board and the initiated the corporate reform process in the fall of 2013. The council was briefed on it in November, and through these actions, the Committee on Corporate Reform was formed. At the time in which that happened, both council and the executive board expressed concerns that they have lost effectiveness and strategic focus, that they are not acting in a substantive way. And none of us are surprised to hear that, but the important thing was, by and large, they welcome corporate reform. I don't say everybody does, but by and large, I think clearly most people, a vast majority of people, are of that opinion. And then there's some legal things. The DC, we're incorporated in Washington, DC, and they are changing, have changed, and will probably, it's a technical kind of thing. Basically, there's the laws or rules of incorporation have changed, and our legal advisors tell us, you know, you can't hold on much longer the way you are, and you better just do it now, and if you're going to have corporate reform, do it in a way that will be consistent. You don't have to do it again or rewrite your bylaws. So there are some legal issues, but I don't want to stress that. Now here is, if you like, the problem, or the issues. No, not problems, fair enough. This is the way we're organized now. Okay, this is an important slide. You need to internalize this to understand much of what will follow. We have the council. De jure, legally, they're the board of directors. And the board of directors is a legally defined term. It is the ultimate responsible body for the health of the organization. They're charged with strategic planning, fiduciary responsibilities, making sure that financially things are done properly, and overseeing and hiring the executive or executives and overseeing them. Okay? Now, in fact, but it's a large representative body, and large representative bodies don't do that very well. So there is an executive board, which is really an executive committee for the council, which in fact does that now. Okay, so de facto it's the board of directors. So at the top level, there's just historically we've evolved into a situation that's just not proper, and it should be straightened out, and roles and responsibilities should be clarified. And that's one of their things about roles and responsibilities have lost clear definition. That's certainly true up there. Now, the next comes where the president or presidential line sits there, and de jure, the president is the chair of the board, but de facto the presidential line has felt, and the president has acted increasingly as a CEO, which is not, I think, normal or desirable in the long run. Now, whenever we say this, people ask us, well, what do you mean? Why? Give me some examples. And I will give you two, but understand this is a sensitive issue, okay? And so I will try to explain, to relate two of them to you, which I think illustrate the points, okay? The first one is related to open access. In last fall, when open access had sort of hit the consciousness of high levels of government, and it was being considered in OSTP and in Congress, and the heads of directors of the various organizations that fund science. The presidential line felt that we needed to be more active in advocating and having a presence at that level in the open access debate that was going on. But that required inputs and participation of all three of the units that we have: the Washington office, the Ridge operation, and the publishing operation, and so these all sat in different columns in the organization. And so Michael Turner stepped in and pulled everything together and got the presentation materials and whatever, and we did go in. I think we're effective at this high level. But it took an action on the part of the presidential line and the president to do that. My personal view is it was successful, and it was important that we did do it. In fact, we were saying, why didn't you come sooner? Okay, so that's a structural issue. The other is more about priorities. The council, the executive board, if you think of it as the board of directors, has fiscal responsibility and strategic responsibility. And for some time, the board had wanted strategic budgeting. Okay? Now, to be fair, to be honest and fair, I don't think that the operating officers disagreed with that. But that is a big job, it turns out, much bigger than I thought it would be. Because you're going from the budgets the way they're done for accounting purposes into something that's called a management budget, which is in different terms, and you have to, so that boards can understand. And in order to, and the presidential line was worried that with open access heating up, with the vagaries of funding and all kinds of things which impact us in a long-term basis, that the lack of strategic budgeting was really handicapping us to fulfill our fiduciary and financial responsibilities. And so in that case, because I was the chairman of the budget committee that year, I really laid in and said, we've got to do that this year, and we got it done. And I think everybody cooperated. But it did set a priority that meant other things didn't get done, and those kinds of priorities the presidential line felt they had to enforce at that time. So those are two. And I think the main thing is not the specifics, but the character of the two. Making APS coherent and establishing priorities that are central in the minds of the executive board or the board of directors, however you want to look at it. Now, coming down, we have this triumvirate structure. It's unique. No other organization, sister organization, has that. That doesn't mean it's not good. It's just a fact. I'll come back to that. And in fact, Joe Serene, who is retiring this year, I can understand why. He's got 3 jobs, and none of them are easy. And how that didn't get sorted out earlier, I don't know. But I think we owe him, let me just say, as a personal remark, I mean, I don't know how he did it. And I admire his character and willingness to live with that. And I mean that. So bottom line here is roles and responsibilities have lost clear definition. And the critical link between the presidential line and the operating offices is presently not best practice, which is a polite way of saying not working well and not the way it should be, and none of us think it's the right way to do business. But it's happened because of these issues that I've alluded to. So we have to have a structure that avoids that. So some key questions that the committee asked itself, there's a lot of input behind this, of course, is, and this reiterates some of the things I've said, are our present structures sufficiently strategic and forward-linking? You can read the example there. Can we seize opportunities and anticipate problems? Nimble and flexible, basically, can we change at a rate which is necessary in the times in which we live? Clear roles and responsibilities, authority and accountability, that's always good. We're not looking for egomaniacal hierarchical structure, where we want a very interactive and cooperative structure, but we do need more authority and accountability. Okay, now I'm not going to go through this in detail. This is a timeline. You can get this. I'll tell you at the end how to get it. But the point is, I want to mention the blue lines that are, the items that are highlighted by blue line. I've said something about the early history. I won't say more than that. But the committee was formed, and you've seen who that was, and contracted to 2 consultants to help us through this, and they've turned out to be, I think, extremely effective, and we all admire the job they're doing. And they insisted that we do data gathering, okay, that we should get a lot of information on a number of issues, and I'll give you just highlights of that, and the report, the longer presentation that I gave 2 days ago, was it, at the council, we'll put that up on the web page, and you can take a look at that and get more detail if that's what you want. But there were a lot of, basically, interview processes to a variety of constituencies, both in and outside of APS, and I'll come back to that a little bit more. And all of that was pulled together, and then on February 22nd, the last line under where data gathering, we presented some of this to the leadership convocation, got good feedback from them, and then a day later we had our first meeting of the committee in which we began the process of formulating our recommendations and suggestions for reform. And we've had subsequent meetings as well, okay? And then we are essentially where that first red line is. We had a discussion 2 days ago with the council, and they gave us lots of feedback. It was a very, how would I put it, intellectually scintillating time, for me anyway. And now we need to do a lot more of that. We need to get the word out. That's what I'm doing here today, and get feedback. And eventually, all this has to be pulled together into a final set of recommendations with a lot of details and a lot of questions answered, which are not now, and many of which you will have in your own mind, which doesn't mean you shouldn't bring them up here, but we know that, and that in the original schedule was to be done on May 13th. A month later, there would be a special council meeting in which they would pass judgment on this, and then a final vote in mid-July. Obviously, between May 13th and June 13th, there has to be a lot of vetting of what the final recommendations are. We're not saying you can take a fait accompli and just hand it to the council, and we need to think through how to do that. And then eventually, of course, it's voted by the membership. If council says it's okay, then the members vote, which is as it should be. Now, just as a primer, so we all understand what the words mean, let me just quickly go through this. Governance, there's a board of directors and there's an executive. That's what those 2 columns are. And I won't read these, you can glance down them, but you can see that they're different. The board of directors has the ultimate responsibility for a strategic plan and for resource allocation and setting policy and hiring and overseeing the top executive officer or officers. Whereas the chief of staff, the highest level of the executive, assists the board to pay attention to the right things in strategic council. The board doesn't do this out of whole cloth, okay, or out of the ether. The executive officers and the executive staff obviously have better institutional memory and in many ways deeper understanding of what the real problems are, so they should bring them to the board. Okay, so it's not a wall. Well, you can go on down, and then the executive has to manage the business of the organization and oversee the staff. And the thing that is most important, and is, what would I say, how I say this, which is now becoming the what's considered best practices, and it's certainly congenial to our culture, okay, is that there should be joint responsibility for strategic thinking and planning and timely action. And you will see that theme play out in some of the other things I'm going to say. And we have to have a board of directors. That's required by law. Okay. Now, there was a survey of some of our peer societies. I could give you a list of them, but I tried to get the number of slides down. But there are organizations you would well imagine: the American Chemical Society, the Materials Research Society, the AAPS, and there's a whole list of them. And it's a list you would say, yeah, that's about right. And here's a contrast of what the responding organizations said, our sister or peer organizations, and with the way we are. Without exception, the final governance authority is held by the board of directors. Some of them had different things in the past, but everybody has to conform with the new rules, and so that's the way things are going. Whereas we have presently the final governance authority is held by the council. I mentioned that before. Board hires a single CEO to oversee the organization. And this item 2 may seem peculiar to you, but that's what our bylaws say. But what we actually do is the board hires the operating officers and the council approves them. Okay, so you can see we're already operating in, I think, a perfectly sensible way, but it's not consistent with our own rules. That's not good. They are adding, I'll show you, in most cases, they have a provision on their board of directors to bring in board members who are appointed by the board to achieve balance if there's some awkwardness in the elected members, which of course doesn't, that's a different matter, and expertise. Okay, so that's one new way that's going on. The treasurer is also required legally, and treasurer here does not mean chief financial officer. It means a high level oversight of the financial and investments and all things financial at a high level. Presently, Joe does that along with all the other things he does, and I'm not saying he hasn't done a good job, but it is a required thing on the board. They want somebody who worries about that. The best analogy I could give you is imagine an audit committee where they got to get into all those details and say everything's okay. It's sort of, roughly speaking, equivalent thing on the financial side. And it is required. Okay, so the CEO is often an ex officio on the board, but only one does he or she have a voting seat. So they're on ex officio, but they don't vote. There's one exception. In our case, all 3 operating officers are on the board and do have a vote. CEO has authority to hire a senior team, blah, blah, blah. In our case, each operating officer has authority to do that within his or her own domain. So that gives you, I think, a good picture of what's common now. Doesn't mean we should do it, but that's what's commonly being done. But there are a couple of interesting exceptions. In the AAAS, the editor-in-chief and publisher are jointly appointed by the CEO and the board, not by the CEO. Okay, it's a joint operation, joint responsibility. But they nonetheless report to the CEO / executive publisher, which is the name they use for their CEO. I think the logic there, I would suspect, is because in budgets you got to have everybody coming up through one line. And I think this reflects something that is part of our culture. Gene certainly feels it very strongly. And that is that publishing is so central to who we are and to our financial situation that the editor-in-chief must have the ability to make what's the word I want? Representation to the board on what the issues are. Okay, and other organizations feel that too, and how this will be sorted out, I don't know. It's a difficult issue, it's tricky, but I've stated the reasons that everybody's thinking about it, and the Committee on Corporate Reform has talked about it, but we've not, it's a complex issue, and we said, let's talk to council and see what they say, and we had a meeting that involved all the operating officers to discuss some of this, or at least to list the issues. Okay, so that's a piece of unfinished business. Okay, now I can go a little faster. Trends, I'm not going to go through this. The trends follow more or less what you've seen in the survey, so let me just skip over that. Headlines of the interviews. There were a lot of interviews, as I said, current and past leadership, the staff, high-level staff, and knowledgeable others, people in other societies who know physicists or I don't know, you sit down and you think who has a good independent outside view of APS, and there were people chosen for that. And here are the highlights of what they said. APS is operating in a complex, rapidly situation, blah, 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 that requires nimble strategic leadership. I think that's the same thing I said earlier, but everybody feels that. Okay, you got to do that. While representation is valued, council is described as unwieldy, slow, a rubber stamp for the board, not a good use of the time of very smart people. And they certainly feel that way. I think all of us do, that it's just not sensible the way it is. Current role of delineation between the council and e-board is not a good match for modern governance needs. I think we would agree with that. Greater accountability for success and failure is desired. We are mixed up in a way that's, roles and responsibilities aren't clearly stated, so it's hard to have accountability and whatever, and so there's a need to do that. Presidential line filling a void and stepping into the CEO role seen as problematic. I can assure you the presidential line feels that. If you don't, I can say personally, as one of the culprits, you might say, I certainly feel that. It's not a role that I think is right or I would want to play or I signed up for or whatever you want to do. It's a sign of some dysfunction. And the problem is to fix it if it's structural. Okay. Okay, many see the need to change despite triumvirate working well now, as described as too personality dependent. The present triumvirate is proud of how well they work together, and they deserve credit for that. They do. But that doesn't solve all the problems. So, but they're congenial, and there's certainly conversations back and forth. I've described a couple cases where that even wasn't, I think, sufficient in my view or the committee's view. So that's just the way people look at it. And by the way, I should say there are people who defend it, both inside the organization and outside. So it's not universal. Okay, here's what I said at the beginning. This is the way we are now. And so now, pay attention. Here comes what we're thinking about how we should go forward. Yeah, let me do this first. Things the committee agrees must be preserved. We've heard this countless times. If I were to get up and put on a different shirt and pair of pants and shoes, I would say them too, as would I think anybody on the committee. Core physics culture of APS must be preserved. Quality of deliverables to member society, that's got to be paid attention to, and that we do that also, and that's in the strategic plan. Strong member engagement, and I will show you when I flesh this out where we agree with that, and well, we believe that, and how we're proposing to do better. And to ensure that APS remains the preeminent physical society, and that is why we want corporate reforms, and because we want that to be true too. Okay? All right. So now this is not a, help me, organization chart. It looks like one, but it's not meant to do that. It's meant to show you the bodies that we want to create or whatever, and how we see them interrelating. And I'll go quickly over this, and then we will have a breakout of the responsibilities of each of those boxes, not the senior officers, but to the two green ones and the top brownish one. So the highlights is to repurpose the council, that's a consultant speak, to focus on issues of science and approve science policy and some other things which I'll come to. I'll give you examples when I do that. Eliminate the executive board and establish a new board of directors. And by law, the board of directors is has the ultimate governance accountability. That's required. Now, both of these bodies are adaptations of the ones we have. So don't think this is a radical change, but it's sort of to restate what they should do. And we are recommending that we have a CEO to get more coherence in setting priorities and in communications with the board. Doesn't mean that the senior officers wouldn't be at board meetings. And these red double-headed arrows are to indicate that at each of those interfaces, we want partnering. In the strategic planning, for example, that's got to be a discussion between the CEO and his colleagues, his or her colleagues, and the board. Similarly, as you'll see, we're going to give more responsibilities and even more authority in a way to the council, so there has to be good interactions to keep things going and get good communication between those two bodies. So that's what those arrows mean. Okay, I don't think we could even draw an organization chart with crisp, clear delineation of what each box does, because we're not that far into it. And we want to get views from people like you before we do that. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the main boxes. So we're proposing to take the present council, change its name a little bit, APS Council of Representatives, but that's not cosmetic. It's meant to be a member assembly. Remember, it's no longer the board of directors. So we wanted to focus on science and approve science policy. Let me give you two examples. Suppose somebody comes in, wants a division of, oh guys, I can't say this without stepping on toes. Economic planning in Washington, D.C. or something. I'm making a joke. In other words, there are people on the fringes of what we would consider our core, some of which are appropriate as divisions in APS, some we might question. And that responsibility would lie with the council, because that's a science issue. It's not a management issue. A similar one is science policies. We make statements. We are currently working and reviewing our statement on climate change. Ultimately, that will have to go to the council for approval to send to the members. And we would do that responsibility, which is huge, would remain. And yesterday, or the day before yesterday, there were all kinds of ideas that people got, because they like this notion, the second bullet, of creating a speaker of the council. That would be a person who would lead the council meetings. Presently, the president does that. So it would be one of their own, so to speak, and that we would have a steering committee to manage the agenda and operations of the council, so that the council has very strong say in what it is they want to know and deal with. Okay, and there's a lot of discussions of how do they take that and work it into the other governance bodies, and that's a fair question. But this is done intentionally by the committee to empower the membership more, probably operationally that would mean all the units, so that we do get good input and the problems that they're having are articulated at the highest levels in the organization and then dealt with. Okay, so that's a major change, and I think most people like it. They have questions about it, but they like it. And they will, as they do now, elect council members to the board of directors. That's what's done now. And by law, the members of the board of directors have to be traced back to the membership. You can't be a self-appointing board totally. Okay? The presidential line is elected by the members, the council is elected by the members, and the council then elects some of their own for serving on the executive board. I think that part works well, and I think it's a good governance structure for us. Oops, yeah, okay. Okay, the board of directors, well, the first two bullets are, let's talk about the roles. And this is just a litany of the things that boards are supposed to do. Fulfill fiduciary responsibilities. This obedience, loyalty, and care are legal antiquities, which are, you know, you have to be responsible, you can't be parochial, and you better pay attention to the finances, and so on and so forth. Oversee strategy and resources, oversee the executive, serve as external ambassadors. Obviously, the CEO would also do some of that. And the president chairs the board. That's as it is now. Composition would be the presidential line, a new treasurer with the more high-level oversight responsibilities that I explained, elected from the board, by the board, from its members. Members elected from council, that's currently now, I think, 9. It's 3 a year, is that right, Kate? 4 a year. So 12 members of the board are from the council, elected by the council. And that would include the speaker, surely, if we do that. And then up to 2 members at large appointed to provide the needed expertise or balance or whatever. And those would be elected by the board. They wouldn't be any one person's prerogative. Okay. Okay, the CEO, ex officio on the board, non-voting member of the board. There's a lot of debate about voting or non-voting. Just to illustrate that there's 2 sides to this, many CEOs don't want to vote. Feels it ties their hands. Some want, you know, may have worries about whether the board is effective or whatever else. But I mean, I just want to say, I'm not going to, I mean, you have to form your own opinion, but there are 2 sides to that, and most organizations now have it non-voting. Okay, then there's this partners with the president to guide strategic foresight and preparedness. That's just a way of saying, and it's the way we operate increasingly now, is that I interact with Kate as the sort of spokesperson for the 3 operating officers, and in concert with them, we try to work out what the agenda of the board ought to be and keep it on the things that are strategic or financially critical or whatever to make it more like a board than it has been. That's not because, I mean, there was complicity on both sides, I guess, is the way I put it. And I think we still have a ways to go to learn how to do that, but I think Kate would agree that we're moving in that direction, and I don't think anybody views it superly controversially, as controversial. And, you know, ensures the coherent, effective, efficient, and accountable organization. That is to say, the way I like to say it is the one sort of not simple-minded, but kind of not very flowery way to say why you want a CEO is you want somebody, when they get up in the morning, it's the first thing they think about is the whole organization. Now that requires more getting together and so on and so forth, and nobody has explicitly the responsibility and therefore the accountability at the executive level for thinking about the whole organization all the time. Okay, and but again, I saw some head shaking. Not everybody agrees with this. I'm going to be completely honest. And additional aspects of the executive structure are still under consideration. That refers to the discussions about the role of the editor-in-chief and the publisher and how they should be handled in the structure. And that's just what that is. Okay. So in summary, the corporate reform initiative is now really moving along. You saw that first red arrow was about halfway down. And this is a little dated. This is what I used at the March meeting, but at its first full meeting plus subsequent telephone meetings, we present the structure that I have outlined, and all votes were unanimous on that. And I think it is, and it's unanimous in its view that corporate reform is necessary and will lead to a stronger and effective APS going forward. Now, I want to stress how important that statement is, because the presidential line was steeped in this. They had a lot of, you've been thinking about it for years, and certainly the last year. But these are people that came on from the executive board who had not been through all of that. And in the course of a meeting in one day, I think they came away feeling, yes, I understand, and we need to do something. Now, what you're going to do, we can talk about that. But they did, when they understood, including input from the operating officers who weren't on the committee, that we need to do this and would be better for it. And then it's a lot of details, but I don't want to say the details are trivial or are not important. So it's time now to engage with the members. That's one of the reasons I'm here now. And we need to do a lot of this. And when I get home and see my wife for a couple days and rest, maybe we'll think about how to do that. But we need to do a lot of socializing of all of this, and we know that. We want feedback, and we are member-driven, and all those good things, and we do believe in that. So if you want to stay with this, one way is to go to the website on corporate reform. There's the address. Some people have squawked that it's buried a little bit too much, and so we'll get a place you can click on the first home page. This is the original picture of the original page. There's now more. There's another video, and there's more documents. The longer presentation, which I gave you abbreviated version of today, which we presented to council, will be up there, and you can talk to them, and there's no confidentiality about all of that. So look at it, and we need to get that up, but in the next few days that will happen. So other than that, thank you and stay tuned.